Alright, now in this particular chapter, what we'll be looking at is ASP.NET Web API. Now, this is an important chapter to start with. It's kind of an introduction of what's a Web API. Now, majority of my students are already aware about what's an Web API, but this is just an introductory chapter which gives you an idea what really is an Web API. Now, until now, what we have been looking at our previous chapters or previous videos was that what we have built until now is a user is able to look at a view which happens to be the application and a page, and web view talks to web controller, and from web controller what really happens is it extracts the data from Microsoft SQL Server and then sends it back to the web view. And what user is able to see is a page where the table is visible on the screen, and they are able to look at the view and the page. So why is Web API required? Now, Web API is a concept where the Web API as such can extract the data from Microsoft SQL Server as well, and it can send the data to different third-party apps or third-party applications. It could be React, a JavaScript application. It could be Angular application. It could be an Android phone or a mobile app, or it could be iPhone mobile app, or it could be any third-party application. You name it, it can be a third-party application. It could be Facebook, it could be Google, it could be LinkedIn, it could be Yahoo, it could be Instagram. So any app can actually talk to our database or talk to our application through a Web API. So it has become very important when you are actually building an application that you build a Web API as well, which you can expose the data with to the third party or some other application which wants to integrate with you. And just to give an idea, API itself stands for Application Programming Interface. So it's kind of an interface or an integration which is exposed to the third party applications or outside world as such. It could be a public API, it could be a private API. Of course, private API is the one which is more secure. It could be public API as well to easily expose it to the public. But generally, when you are building an application, if your application has to be very secure, the idea is to build a private API which itself has its own authentications and authorization as such. But over here, what we'll be looking at, particularly for simplicity and better understanding as an introduction, is a simple API which can expose the data to the third-party applications. Now, to give an idea how the API generally works is APIs, there are different verbs as such. So when I say verbs, it's a terminology related to API. It could be a get. Get similarly works to how you get the data from the application. Post is something similar, like you are trying to insert the data into the application via Web API. Put or patch is kind of an update, and delete, of course, is to remove the data from the application via the Web APIs. So these are the verbs that are present or can be actioned via Web API. And this picture shows an idea about how the model view controller or how the Web API really works. So what generally happens is the third party applications try to access the Web API via a JSON file, data transfer. So the data which will be transferred will be in the JSON format, key value pair mechanism, which will be going in depth in the upcoming videos, and it will hit the Web API, and from Web API it accesses the API controller, and from API controller it accesses the data. Once the data is accessed, it goes via API controller and back to Web API, and then it gets transmitted back to the third party applications as such. So we'll be going into depth of this. Don't worry right now. But my idea was to give this introductory video or a chapter so that some of my students who aren't aware about web APIs as such, they get an idea as an introduction. And when we go into the application, we'll be building the simple web API which will extract the data in the JSON format, and we'll be able to check that data whether that's correct or not. So let's do that in our upcoming videos.